Welcome to another episode of the Build and Scale Boldly podcast, the podcast for purpose-driven women entrepreneurs who want to grow their businesses with more profit, more ease, and more impact. I'm your host, Dr. Leti Alto, physician, an entrepreneur, real estate investor, and today we're going to be talking about something I'm really passionate about, and that is what you can learn by owning a business. Now, owning a business can get a pretty bad rap, right? In a lot of places, people talk about how much work it is to own a business. There is risk owning a business. There's uncertainty, and there are challenges in business. And especially if you're a solopreneur, you basically have a job with the worst boss ever, and that's you, right? So maybe you've thought at times, if you have a business, I should go back to that simpler path, or is this even worth it? And I think that's a normal thought that many of us have during the most challenging and difficult times in our businesses. And if you've thought either of those things, you're not alone. But today I want to flip the lens a little bit and talk about the opposite, not about how business is challenging, but how it is one of the most powerful personal development containers on the planet ever made. And so if you're building your business right now, whether you're just starting out, you're in year 2 or year 5 or even year 10, this episode is going to remind you why what you're doing really matters for your own personal development. So let's get right into it. So let's start out with a little bit of a reality check. The part that nobody posts on Instagram is this. Owning a business means you're constantly dealing with change and you're constantly dealing with challenge. The environment changes, the customer's needs evolve, the economy shifts on you, platforms change, legal policies change, governmental policies change, and sometimes even your own life changes, right? You have a baby or you have a change in your marriage, your capacity changes, maybe you have a health problem, your family changes. So there's a lot of change that happens to both you and to your business. And so you have to really be nimble in business. You have to pivot. You have to make decisions with imperfect information. We talked about this in a previous podcast, is perfectionism doesn't work in a business. And you have to deal with a lot of things that a lot of us have fears about. Rejection, disappointment, failure. That's a big one for a lot of us. Confusion, uncertainty. And you may even have moments where you're like, why did I choose this? Or why am I doing this again? And how can I even get out of this? And so there's a saying that I wanted to bring to you guys. It's a Tony Robbins saying, and it's so powerful and so relevant here, which is the quality of your life is in exact proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably live with. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. The quality of your life is in exact proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably live with. So this is not just about this. This is about life in general and the uncertainty that we all have day to day and the change that we all have. But even more so in business, you see this kind of turbocharged or maybe even just concentrated because you're in the weeds of the business every day and you're seeing how things change so quickly. And so we have to really become comfortable with uncertainty, comfortable without knowing all the information, comfortable with change if we're going to lead businesses. And so business is basically uncertainty training, right? And if you can't tolerate uncertainty, it's going to be a lot of suffering along the way. And I'm saying that with a lot of love because we've all been there as business owners. We've had those moments of suffering. And ideally, we've had those moments where we start to suffer and we're able to get ourselves out of it with our mindset work as well. And I see a lot of brilliant women, especially physician entrepreneurs who are used to being really high achievers, who never fail, who are incredibly capable, but really struggle and suffer through the experience of being a business owner and experiencing all that change and uncertainty. And they really feel like business should be more stable. They feel like if they do the right things, business is always going to work out. And that's just not the way it is. A lot of times it isn't predictable. It's not a linear journey. And that's just business. Business is you try something, maybe you put an offer out there, it doesn't work or it somewhat works, you learn from it, you adjust, you do it again. So it's a constant pivot, a constant learning. And so this has been a really uplifting episode at this point, right? And you're probably sitting there saying, why did I even tune into this episode? Because it's just such a Debbie Downer about business. But that's not what episode is about. I wanted to acknowledge the challenge of business, right? And to acknowledge that that's a reality of part of what we experience in business. But I love being a business owner. I love being an entrepreneur because there's also an other side of business that I think is just so light and so important for all of us to really appreciate as we go through the journey, because it really adds the element of business that really keeps a lot of us going. And so that's really what I wanted to focus today's episode on, is how business teaches you and who it forces you to become, and all the good things that come out of owning a business, not just the challenges that we usually hear about. So number one is, I wanted to tell all of you that I love business because business makes you become more. And if any of you are business owners who's been at this for 6 or 12 months, you know what I'm even talking about, because you have probably become so much more than you were 6 or 12 months ago when you started this business. You've changed a lot. You've had a lot of challenges. You've had a ton of growth. That's part of what business does for you. So business really calls you forward. It forces you to become a version of yourself who can operate at the next level. And you don't grow your business by staying the same version of you and not changing. You literally have to grow in order to be able to grow your business. Now, business requires you to develop in a lot of ways and grow in a lot of ways. You have to develop as a leader, both of yourself and of others. And if you have a team, you'll find that you really are going to develop leadership skills in a way that you never had them before. You have to develop emotional regulation again for yourself as well as others, because there's going to be times that there's going to be tense conversations. And as the leader, you're going to be there and you're going to have to restructure and change thinkings and affect interactions between people and kind of reset things. You have to learn decision making and moving forward with imperfect information and being able to stick with a decision, but also if a decision's not working, being able to pivot. So you have to learn both of those things. And if you don't make decisions, it will absolutely destroy your business, because you will not move forward. Decisions move you forward. You have to learn how to communicate with a lot of different personality types. In business, I run DISC personality types on all of my team members before they join. So many variety of different personalities, different ways of operating. And you have to learn how to communicate across the board with employees who are completely different from you in the way that they see the world and their operating system, for how they see issues and interact with others as well. You learn resilience. As I mentioned up front, you have challenges and you have to pick yourself up and keep going. Persistence is perhaps one of the most important things you need as a business owner. And so that resilience of having things not work out and still being able to move forward and do something else is going to be really, really important to having a business. Otherwise, you're just going to give up. You have to learn strategy. You have to learn how to work with limited resources. And you also have to have this identity. You have to choose to have this identity of a business owner, and then also be able to help your employees with the mindset work of all of this too, and the identity work that they're doing. So it's such an interesting pressure cooker of sorts, business, because you will grow in so many different ways by being in the game. And this is so interesting for physicians in particular, because most of us were trained in a world where the path is so defined, and once we got into the right kind of places and did the right things, success was inevitable. So, you would do the prereqs in college, right? And then you get into the right med school, and then you'd pass in med school. By the time I went in, they had kind of dropped grades in my med school. So it was just like pass, fail. Then you went into residency, and you jumped through some more hoops, and then you did the boards, and then you did fellowship, and you jumped through some more hoops, and then you got a job, or you went into practice. If you went into practice, there's a little bit more uncertainty if you did it for yourself. But if you went into an employment, there was a lot of structure. There was a lot of grading of knowing if you were succeeding or not. And so there was a right way. And business just doesn't work like that. There's so many ways to do business. There's so many different choices you can make at every turning point. It's it's not a one size fits all. It literally is a unique journey depending on your type of business, depending on the environment, depending on the day, depending on your team. All those things are variables, and it's absolutely different for every individual as they go through their business journey. And so what really is an adjustment, I will say an adjustment for physicians, and could be seen as terrifying, actually is a liberation, because what you start to learn is who you are. You start to learn, I am a leader. You start to learn that you can do all these things as long as you apply yourself and you learn from other people, you learn from mentors, you learn from peers. You start to realize that you are a learning machine, and you're growing and growing and growing, both as a person and also you're learning business strategy, and you're growing in your mindset as well. If you're out there, putting yourself in the right spaces and really staying open to be able to grow and stay coachable, right? And so every time you do something bold in business, every time you launch something, every time you sell something, every time you post something on social media, anytime you put yourself in a situation you're not quite sure if you can handle it, hiring, pivoting, all those pieces, you grow and you become more. And one way to call this is increasing your threshold of control. I think I've mentioned that before in the podcast, where there are a lot of things you can't handle initially, and then you grow and now you can handle a lot more. And the goal over time is just to continue to increase your threshold of control until you can handle almost everything coming your way. And then you get better quality problems, right? As your business gets larger and larger. And then it's a different scope of how you're dealing with problems, but always you're increasing your threshold of control. So lesson number one really was that business helps you become more. And that's part of why it's such a phenomenal thing. Lesson number two that I've learned about what business can do for you is that it really can give you a different level of fulfillment. So what's fulfillment? Fulfillment is growth and contribution. We just talked a lot about growth, and we talked about becoming more. But business is really the opportunity for you to be able to give of yourself at a different level. And by the way, when you're growing and you're becoming more, you actually have more to give. And now that contribution can even expand even more. So business gives you a direct pathway to fulfillment, in my opinion, especially if you're doing it well, especially if you're doing it something you're really passionate about that has an impact in the world. I love to work with purpose-driven entrepreneurs because what they're doing has a greater meaning beyond themselves. It's for their community, it's for the world, it's to see the change they want to see for the greater global community. Now, fulfillment doesn't mean comfort, right? Growth is not comfort. Anytime you try something new, it's not comfortable. Anytime you have a challenge that forces you to grow, it's not necessarily comfortable. But again, fulfillment comes from both growth, where you're expanding as an individual, but also contribution, where you're giving value to others and you're impacting others in a meaningful way. And owning a business really gives you an opportunity to experience both intensely. And I love that for it. When I think about burnout, for example, because so many physicians experience burnout, one of the things that I experienced when I was burnt out was I didn't have growth anymore and I didn't have contribution. I felt like I was a Band-Aid on the system, so I didn't feel like I was contributing in a meaningful way. And growth, I just felt like I really understood how to do my hospitalist job pretty well. And I wasn't really growing and expanding and learning new things at the level that I was, let's say, in residency. So burnout, lack of fulfillment, that's really what it's about. But in business, first of all, there's never a point where you're not learning something. If you're not learning something, you're in trouble around the corner, because something's going to change and you will need to be on top of learning. And then the contribution piece doesn't change too. As long as you have people that you're serving and you get to watch their transformation, that contribution piece is like in front of you every single day. At least that's my experience. So business for me, it's not just about the money. It's about meaning. It's about saying, I'm building something that matters for my community and for the greater world and for others. I'm using my skills to become something better. And I'm creating transformation in people's lives. And yeah, it's not always easy, like we talked about earlier, but it is the work that makes such a difference in your level of purpose and meaning in your life. And then also in other people's lives. And it's something you're choosing to do when you do business. So I want all of you who are business owners to really see how you're contributing. See how you're, and really relish that, because that is such an important part of fulfillment, is to recognizing how you're helping others through your business. And I think business is just such a beautiful space to be able to contribute on another level. And especially, again, if the business is aligned with your purpose, it's really the fulfillment of owning something and making an impact in the world. Now, the third lesson that I have learned for business that I think is really a phenomenal way that business gives you that opportunity to grow is it reawakens your creativity. Now, I think many of us were very creative when we were young. We were into drawing, we were into building. We had minds where we would tell stories and we would play games with others. But as we go through this space of, especially being a physician, but if you're a professional of any type where you went through school and you learned all these frameworks and you learned all these right ways to do it, you probably followed what mostly you had learned in terms of systems and structures and what you were told was the right way to do things. You probably didn't get a lot of space for creativity, but business can really reawaken your creativity. And you can be in a space where you're creating solutions to problems. We talked about that a lot, but you're creating offers, you're creating products, you're creating messaging, you're creating systems and processes, you're creating experiences. If you're doing retreats, you're creating community and you're creating culture for your community. You're creating content, value add content, like podcasts, for example. It's such an opportunity to create and to take something in your mind and be able to communicate it to other people in a way that they understand. It's a really a value add to other people. And it comes from your creativity, it comes from your mind first. You can create partnerships. You can create new ways to serve your customer. You can think about, if you're very passionate about your community, like how can I help them even more? Like what else can I do to serve them? That's such a really great question to be asking yourself all the time as a business owner. And so many ideas and so much creativity can come out of asking that question. We ask things in our business like, how do we make our students more successful? How could I, what do my people really need right now? How can I deliver the results even better? Like, how can I create ways for people to be able to get this impact even easier? There's so many different questions you can ask yourself, and questions lead you to answers and lead you to new ways to be able to serve. And so feeding back to the contribution piece above, the questions can really literally lead you to that. So I love creating as part of business and being able to use that piece of me that I never really fully got to experience in practicing medicine at the same level. And so I think that there's something, about business that brings you back to possibility and openness and expansiveness. And then you get to build out of that. And it's really a fun thing to do as a physician, to be able to do that if you're not doing it day to day in your business or your career as a doctor. Lesson 4 that I have learned from business is that your impact is just multiplied dramatically beyond the one-on-one. So I've always thought of medicine as really a one-on-one, where you're sitting with a patient and you're helping them individually. And then of course, you're serving a lot of different patients, and maybe you're doing some health education and you're able to reach more of them, or maybe you're training residents, you're able to affect more patient lives through the residents you're training. But business expands your impact beyond that, and beyond just, visit to visit. Now, all of a sudden, you can serve yourself to many, many people. And as you build a team, you can serve even more. You can create things like programs or communities or, products or brands that just affect, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And you can build, most importantly, a movement, right? A movement of people who believe in what you're doing, and you're moving together and affecting even more change beyond even the customer that you're serving. Because when you affect their lives, it affects their families' lives and the people that they know. And maybe they tell their friends about it, and then all of a sudden the whole community is transformed, and business gives you that opportunity. And if you are in the business of transformation, and so that would be things like if you're coaching, if you're consulting, if you're doing education, leadership, wellness, things like that, you're empowering, you change that individual in a very meaningful way. And the ripple effect goes beyond that person to affect many, 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 many people who you won't even hear about, right? You can look at the impact of your business and say, I've had 5,000 customers served. But again, if you're in the business of transforming their lives, it's far greater, the impact that you've had besides those 5,000 people who have taken your course or who have ended up in your coaching program. And so when you're in business and you own a business, you can build a structure that impacts so much greater than you're impacting in your day-to-day work as a physician. And by the way, I don't want to in any way diminish the work that you guys do as physicians at all. I also, as a physician, I think that it gives you the way, and a lot of you are physicians with practices, right? You are now impacting a lot more when you are a business owner because you're affecting all those people's lives than if you're an employee and you're serving your patients one-to-one. Lesson number 5 of business, and why I love business so much, what it's taught me is there's really no cap on earnings in business, and that changes so much. When you're a doctor, you are one-to-one. You're trading time for money as well. Your amount of money you are is limited by the hours you spend. It is capped, and there's a ceiling. And yes, you can take on more shifts, more responsibility. Maybe you can increase that amount you're paid slightly, but still there's a cap because it's so limited by what you personally are able to do. Business is very different, and owning a business teaches you what's possible financially. In business, your income is tied to, how much value you create, how much demand there is, how many people want what you're doing. It's also tied to how you're able to delegate and how you build your team, how you build systems, how do you make things more efficient. There's so many ways that you can grow the value of your business by making shifts in that business and making shifts in what you're capable of doing too, and being able to deliver on a different level. And so it doesn't mean that business money is automatic, that you're absolutely going to make a lot more money in business as a doctor, but it means that it's potential there. When you think about how people have created massive amounts of wealth in this country, it's business ownership and it's real estate, right? It's those things that really build a lot of wealth. And that's because businesses and things like real estate, those are assets. You're building a machine, you have leverage and structure. And so your time becomes decoupled from the amount of return you can have from it. And that really changes your life. It changes your choices, changes the kind of support you can access, changes the risks you're willing to take, changes the legacy for your family. And I just think it's really freeing also to know that the potential is not capped, and all that it's dependent on is your creativity, your expansive thinking, and the way that you can, execute in practice with your team and your structure and your leverage. So it's a combination of things, but it's so exciting to know that anything can be created, any amount of wealth can be built through business, and there's no limit to it. It's really exciting, in my opinion. Number 6, owning a business introduces you to a totally different group of people than you would normally be exposed to. And I think that's really, really fun. Some of the most interesting humans I know are entrepreneurs. They're thinking differently. They're seeing things differently. I sit in their presence and I listen to them and I'm like, oh my gosh, I never would have considered that. I just love all the different viewpoints and all the different ways that people have been able to grow businesses and entrepreneurs. I feel like I'm constantly learning from entrepreneurs. They just think differently than a lot of people who are, day to day as employees. They question assumptions, right? They don't say just because something's always been done that way, we should do it that way. They're always thinking a little bit differently. They're creating cool things out of their minds. They're taking risks. They're building solutions. And a lot of them are really purpose driven and really care what they're doing. And I just love being in rooms like that where you start to expand what you believe is possible. You start to expand beyond those limitations that most people believe. You start to normalize all the things we go through as entrepreneurs, like hiring and building teams and making bold decisions and acting in the face of uncertainty and leveling up yourself and growing in all those pieces. And so I think entrepreneurship, being around the right individuals, is such an exciting part of it. And it's one of definitely the reasons to own a business, for sure, is just to be in that community of people who are just expanding beyond what most people think is possible and really challenging themselves to grow something more meaningful that will have greater impact on others. I just find it very life-giving to be in that environment. So definitely lesson 6 is, that owning a business introduces you to just a really group of exciting human beings. So, I've talked here about this dichotomy, right? We started out with kind of the darkness and the challenge and the sometimes parts of business that people really don't like. And then we talked about all the reasons that I think business is so exciting and why I love being in business. And you know what? The both parts are present at the same time. Business ownership is not easy, right? And if you want to spend all your time thinking about all the challenges of business and all the ways that it's difficult and all the struggles you're going to have as a business owner, you can definitely do that. And a lot of people do. They like to look at what's wrong. They like to stack what's wrong. And that's where they like to live a lot of the time. I love to see that, but also appreciate the lightness and the beauty and the magic of being in business. And so even though business ownership is tough, I love to stack all the wonderful things about business and spend a majority of my time really thinking about that. And that's really why I wanted to have this podcast, because I think so many people talk about what's tough in business. I see it in social media all the time. People are saying, oh, you got to work 95 hours a day. You can't take vacations. Like, there's so much noise out there about all the rough parts of business. And, it grabs attention. So people look at it. But let's also look at all the beautiful pieces of business, and let's see how it makes us stronger. It makes us freer. It makes us more capable. And it allows us to impact and give at a different level, because that part of business is so exciting. I can't imagine at this point in my life not wanting to be an entrepreneur, just because of I'm stacking the positives so much. So now let's just summarize what we've gone through today, because it was a lot of information. So what can you learn from owning a business? You become more and you reach your potential at a different level that you wouldn't have if you didn't have a business. You have the chance to experience real fulfillment from growth and contribution through your business. You reconnect to your creativity that was always there that maybe you forgot. Business gives you that opportunity. You can impact on a much greater level than one-on-one, and impact communities and even perhaps generations of people. You have no cap on your earnings, which means wealth is possible, and also there's no limit to what's possible. And you meet some of the most interesting people. You get to build community, you get to hear about the things that they're doing. And all of those lessons that we just described that you can get from owning a business just changes the quality of your life and changes the possibilities for you. Now, I love to make this podcast actionable, and we just talked about the 6 lessons you can learn from owning a business. This week, I want you to focus on number 6, which was all about relationships. And I want you to make some bold relationship moves. Isolation makes everything heavier. And this week, I really want you to focus on building your entrepreneur network. So if you can think of somebody who's a business owner who you respect and I would suggest DMing them or messaging them and saying, hey, I just want to let you know I appreciate this about you, or you've helped me with this, or I see how you're doing this and it's really, really cool. Attend a networking event. If you don't have one planned in the next couple months, just sign up for one now, just to hang out with other entrepreneurs and get exposure to different ideas and expand your network. You can also ask a question, join an entrepreneurship community, ask a question in that community, or maybe even say yes to a meeting that somebody offers you this week that you would normally say no to, just to make that connection with another entrepreneur who might give you an idea. Relationships are really at the core of business. And relationships can change a whole trajectory of your business. So the more time and energy and effort you put into creating relationships with other entrepreneurs, listening to their opinions, and getting to network with them, connect with them, I think the better off it's going to be for your business in the long run. So say yes to some meetings this week with other entrepreneurs. Now, I just covered my biggest 6 lessons that I learned from owning a business. But if there were any other big lessons that you've learned through business ownership that I didn't cover, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to hello@biara.com and share what business has taught you with us. And if you're a female business owner who wants to build and scale more boldly, make sure to check out all of our free resources at Biara, BEYARA.com. And don't forget to join the Flight Plan, our weekly newsletter, where we give you bold business insights and actionable tips. And I often like to give you a reflection question during these podcasts. So here it is for you today. Where in your business are you resisting uncertainty? And what would change if you got just a little bit more comfortable with uncertainty this week and were able to move forward despite having uncertainty? Now, if this episode gave you some clarity or some inspiration, subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Build and Scale Boldly podcast. And if you know another bold woman entrepreneur who needs to hear this message, send her this episode. Keep dreaming big, keep leading boldly, and most of all, keep building the business and life you love. I'll see you next time.